Hi everyone, welcome to this Data Innovators Masterclass. I'm Julien Redmond from Ignition. I have two very special guests with me today. I guess the first one, proof that the apple doesn't fall very far from the tree, is my brother Sam. Hi Sam, how you going?
Very well, very well.
We might get you to introduce yourself, considering you're probably a new face to this audience. Maybe give us a little bit of your background.
Certainly. Sam Redmond, the director of the Adapt Group. Adapt Group is an advisory across technology, strategy, and innovation. My background has been a circuitous path through technology, through deep tech, climate tech, and through aerospace. And today I'm working with companies, helping them apply AI to identify where AI should be applied, and really to support them in their digital transformation endeavors.
Great. And the other face, which is probably familiar to some of this audience anyway, is Richard Harris. Hey, Rich, good to see you again.
G'day, Jules.
So Richard is a previous colleague, current partner, specializing in data privacy. Rich, give us the 2-minute spiel.
So Data Design Consulting is who I am with, and we specialize in privacy compliance when it comes to personal data, with a specific focus on policies, procedures, and culture.
Yeah, which is so obviously we've dragged together a specialist in AI and a specialist in privacy, so it might be fairly clear what we're going to talk about today. Because there is a real clash here, I guess. There is lots of stuff happening and lots of innovation happening very fast, but there is also, regulatory compliance and a tightening of privacy policies and, and large breaches happening as well. So we wanted to dive into, I guess, how do these worlds collide and some of this is moving really quickly. So feel free to speculate and or let us know what you know, and also maybe call out where we don't know answers yet as well, because I think that's always interesting. So, I mean, for me, it probably starts with transparency and accountability. Because how can AI systems be made more transparent in the way they collect data? When most algorithms, at least in my understanding, Sam, are black boxes, is it actually realistic to expect that there's going to be some sort of transparency in what sort of personal data is being accessed or used to train a model? So we'll start with you on that one.
Look, it's we're straight down the rabbit hole. I think that part of the understanding for the application of AI is thinking about where we are today. So our existing regimes around data use, the culture of an organization around data, how data is reused across an organization, how it's harvested, all of those things are more than likely for most organizations not where they need to be. And AI is an accelerator for digital transformation. So it enables you to very rapidly digitally connect across your organization and to other data sets or other organizations and start delivering outcomes at speed. And so what it's probably going to do in the first instance is bring to the surface all of the inefficiencies and inadequacies you have in the management and execution of your obligations as they stand today. And so I think that that's, if we understand that, then we sort of say, okay, so when we start to embark on deploying AI at an organizational level, then we need to simply just not have the assumption that our current process is effective and the current data that we have rights to use in a certain way. And so I don't think this really sort of reaches into the work that Richard does. But I think that if you start with that premise, then you're more than likely not going to find yourself falling foul of your first implementation of AI. So that's from an organization perspective. When you think about the actual algorithms themselves and what they've been trained on, they're probably the opacest of technologies that we've developed today. We talk about they've been trained on the corpus of human knowledge, and so and now they're creating their own knowledge to try and actually train them even more. So I think that there's that sort of a much sort of more complex element to talk to, but it's a key challenge for organizations to deal with. And I think that's for everybody to start with your own policies, your own practices, your own data, and make sure that that's in order as you embark on AI.
Yeah, that's a good point, because I guess if you're adopting an LLM, or some sort of AI that's been trained on a set of data, and that's probably a very wide, maybe publicly available set of data. But then you're going to apply your own business information to it to make it specific for your use case. So, Rich, the question I have for you then is, who's responsible when you start providing corporate information, to specialize one of these AI solutions? Like, you could be introducing unintended biases or sensitive information. So is it the developer? Is it the company? Is it the regulator? Who's wearing responsibility around this stuff? And I suspect we don't really know. But
Well, I think the important thing, and you use the word at the top of this section, accountability is the watchword here. Ultimately, organizations are responsible for the information they collect and how it's used and protected. But accountability is not only about complying with regulations, it's about demonstrating how you comply with those regulations. So one of the things that we are expecting to happen in our privacy framework in the not too distant future, because it's already part of GDPR and CPRA and a number of other legislations around the world, is that when you're using personal information in what's classified as high risk or sensitive areas, then you use a privacy impact assessment. So I think the important thing is, if you're about to embark on a journey where you are going to apply artificial intelligence, and generally you're not just opening the floodgates and saying, let the AI loose and see what it will do, you're doing it in a developmental area. So you have that window of opportunity to actually, as an organization, go through a privacy impact assessment process. And there are a number of templates. But by and large, the process is you set goals and objectives for the program of work. And in this case, training an AI to have a certain outcome or make certain decisions. You're documenting that. You're trying to understand what is the outcome, or how am I going to measure that outcome to begin with. Then there's a process of mapping the data flows. So what information is going to flow into my organization? Where does it come from? How is it going to flow into this AI model? And potentially then what comes out of the back end of that? And then it's about going through a risk profile. Okay, what risks do I understand from a regulatory compliance standpoint? But then you also have organizational risk. What if we make the wrong decision? What if those biases come through and we're making poor decisions on behalf of people based upon data that has been generated by crusty 40-year-old white men for the last 50 years kind of thing? Then you've got the process, and again, this is collaborative. You have a number of stakeholders involved where you've said, okay, this is my privacy risk, this is my organizational risk, here are the personal risks, so what risks might there be for the individuals in question? Then you have a discussion about how to mitigate those risks. So the privacy impact assessment is a way of bringing the organizational together, taking a step back, and the concept here is privacy by design, that before you go ahead and start building what you want, you're taking the time to think about what are the risk implications for what I'm about to do, and how can I mitigate those risks? Now, some of those risks will be acceptable. Some of them you can mitigate and reduce but not eliminate. Some of them you may be able to eliminate completely. So obviously one of the critical questions is, do I need PII as part of the training model? Can I just use de-identified data? Those are the kind of things. So I would suggest that there is no one person ultimately that should own this, but a privacy impact assessment will tell you who was consulted, who the stakeholders were, and creates an environment whereby everybody can participate and highlight all the risks and how we can mitigate them. And that is something I think it should become part of any organization's DNA when they're about to embark on a new project.
And if I can just add on the back of that, Richard, I think that it's to do that and then know that you have to keep evaluating even those algorithms and they've got deployed, because that de-identified data what we're finding is these really advanced algorithms find patterns, and through those patterns they can associate behavior, and then it can actually precipitate back to the individual. And so you have this
Exactly.
manifestation where you didn't look to actually capture PI, and you end up with PI because undeniably you have the fingerprint of the individual. And so you want the safeguards in. If that's not what you want as an outcome, because all these policies apply to business and government unless you're in the military and unless you're in defense or cyber, etc., and then all of them sort of go away. If you're just a regular company and you're trying to steer clear of that, then you need to constantly be evaluating what are the outcomes and what are the insights that you're getting, because you may actually find yourself just step back over that bridge.
Yeah. And in fact, the template that I use most often when doing a PIA actually has that section of, are you using de-identified data? Is there a chance it can be re-identified? And you're right, the more sophisticated machines get at piecing together seemingly unrelated pieces of information, the minute that you can use that to single out an individual, you're now back into the realm of personal information. So, and also, thank you for reminding me, but it's not a set and forget document, because the actions, the things that you need to do take time. And so having periodic reviews to say, have we done these things? Have other things changed? Is kind of a vital thing. And it's one of those things that, unfortunately, yes, you have to now bake into the cost of doing business, that there is going to be time and resources applied to creating the impact assessment, reviewing it, and adapting accordingly. The important thing is, though, often these documents are not designed to say you can't do something. The documents are designed to say, if you are going to do this thing, then these are the things you need to have done in order to minimize risk to the organization and to any individuals whose data you're using. And should there be any issue, a complaint is made to the government agency or directly or whoever, now you have something to support to say, well, we thought about that. This is what we did. This is why we made the decision we did. And that is also a way of protecting the organization, not just the data or the individuals.
So you guys have already asked and answered two more of my questions, so it's going to be the easiest masterclass ever for me. But that's really good. But we dived straight into the meat of it all, didn't we? So I guess the thought in my head, because of potentially a lot of people listening to this are data engineers or architects who are trying to grapple with this stuff, and my thought, I guess, is how can a user truly provide informed consent to use their data if they don't even understand the model that it's going into, or they say no but they're going to get inferred anyway. So Sam, are there any practical steps for kind of starting an AI project that where you can dip your toe in the water, but you can obviously Richard's talked about doing the privacy impact assessment and understanding what's being there. Are there any other steps from the technology side that you can kind of do to limit your exposure?
Yeah, and look, I think that it will stomp right into Richard's area and then come back out again, and he can add to it. But look, I think in part you need to start with intent. So, what is the intent of the of this digitization? Then you're going to be using AI as a tool. And so, if you're really clear about your intent, then you can step back and say, well, what is the information? What are the facts? What is the data that I require in order to deliver the outcome that aligns with that intent? And then that would then be a proposition for a customer or a client. If you are willing to share this data in this way for this purpose, we can deliver this outcome. And so imagine an insurer. An insurer simply just says, we know that our actuarial models can be more accurate and lead to a lower premium if you're willing to share this information. And these are, here are the caveats, etc., but it's only going to be used in that way. Then you give the user the ability to provide that information, so the model can actually be more specific on you as an individual or as a household or property to then get a better outcome. Then when you build that data set, then you need to flag that data is only consumable in that workflow, which means now you think you've got to set up all of your guardrails around your data and the access to that data and who uses that access to get to that data, etc. And so in order to persist trust, you need to build it in at the data level, so you understand what that data is and how it's accessed, etc. And then you need to make sure those guardrails flow into the AI and into those workflows. And so I think if you start in that way, then you are going to be much clearer with the customer on why they might want to share that information in that way. They've probably already shared most of it. You're just asking it for it to be used in that way, and you're offering them some value. So there's consideration. Arguably, the only reason we collect this data is so we can form a contract between a company and a consumer or a user. You are simply just asking for a new contract to actually deliver a different outcome, and then make sure that the technology and the guardrails sit around that purpose.
Yeah. Okay. So, I mean, because there's obviously people, there's always that traditional concern of like, well, especially with an insurance company, if I share, my health data, does it mean that I'm going to be discriminated against? And I know there's laws in place and those sorts of things, but you do wonder. I know there's obviously a level of comfort with sharing certain information, and then, a lot of people have a very hard wall around, what else they want to share. Rich, have you done work with, I'm sure you have, where there's lots of consumer or patient or health data or, financial services, where there's lots of really sensitive data and coming up with those different classifications of how you actually say, well, yes, you can use this for your base stuff and this next bit for these processes and, a hierarchy of that.
What I would say is, listening to Sam's response there is he's kind of helped highlight one of the big challenges. There's lots of technical terms in the world of AI and machine learning. And when you use words like, guardrails, and also most people out there are going to get lost. In fact, there was some research released just recently about if someone were to read all of the privacy policies that they would have to in the course of their day, it comes out of like weeks of their year would be spent reading nothing but privacy policies. So you've kind of hit the nail on the head. How do we facilitate an informed consent here? So for me, it comes back to how you write your privacy policy, or you make it in your collection statements, because the average person is who we're writing these policies for. And the average person, I like to use the example of my mother-in-law, who refers to Google Chrome as the internet. And that's about as far as her technical understanding goes. She's naturally nervous about sharing certain types of information. So I think that the trick here is think about the artificial intelligence as another person with whom you are disclosing information to in your privacy policies, because that's all AI is. It's emulating human decision making. It does it faster, sometimes a lot better, more efficiently and more accurately. But if we start off on that, then we can, in our policies, make statements along the lines of, we do use your information to facilitate automated decision making, or just making decisions using, machine learning, or whatever term you might end up using. But it's about explaining it in plain language. Now, your information is used in order to make a determination about A, B, or C, and these are the criteria. And explicitly, these are the things that we will not do with your information, and these are the rights you have over the information. And making sure that if someone has more questions, they've got a phone number they can use or an email address that they can use to make contact. And I cannot stress this enough, make sure those phone numbers and those emails are monitored and you're responding in a timely fashion. I cannot tell you how many times it sits there in an inbox that someone maybe checks every 2 weeks. No, if someone's concerned, you want to be able to demonstrate trust, and therefore being responsive, answering questions, providing a lot more, providing that extra detail, being open, and back to that idea of transparency. So I don't think you can realistically explain all the nuances of what data is used, how the algorithm works, what weighting is given to what kind of information, etc. People are not going to read it or understand it. They just want a plain language explanation of, when you give us your personal information, one of the things we're going to do with it is to make a decision in financial services parlance of, will you qualify for a loan? We won't use this information for direct marketing or other purposes. If you have any questions, contact us here.
Does it sound like we need a large language model to read all these privacy statements for us?
Well, yeah. I was going to say there's two things that I think come from what Richard said. One is he mentioned the word trust, and you could have an entire masterclass just on trust, because that's the biggest issue that we have here, is that the populace have a lack of trust, and organizations need to act with trust, and they need to be trusted by the populace, and they need to be trusted by the regulators, and they're two different conversations. What Richard spoke about was plain English, making it really clear for the user, but then it goes to the algorithm. They need to tell the regulator, no, here is how the algorithm works. Here is how it doesn't have bias. We know that the CCTVs in camera have a bias to darker coloured skin. They can't see emotions as well. All of the LED upgrades we've been doing around the world to try and drive efficiency start in the ultraviolet and then go through phosphorus to actually become a white light. They don't render colour and emotion as well in darker skin. So suddenly you have a situation where you've got cameras with a bias, lights with a bias, algorithm has a bias. And so the regulators want to understand, how are your algorithms actually being fair across the populace? But the populace just want to say, can I trust you? Did you say something that I can comprehend? And I think that, so if you take that, you say, yes, I think part of the situation is I'm going to call up and I'm going to have my Jarvis AI. Why? Because we're getting really good at compressing the algorithms down, and it's going to help me ask questions, and it's going to help me interpret answers. And it's probably going to be talking to a chatbot at the other end, which understands all the policies of that company and can answer a whole bunch of the questions. And we're both going to be using AI to try and communicate, and communication is where the intent and the impact align. Yeah. I say something, and what you understood is the same thing. These assistive AIs are going to help in that communication back and forward. And so I think that's just an inevitable future where all organizations do it because it's efficient and it's effective, and they can be far more responsive, and they can be really clear with the customer base. The customer base is probably going to get armed the same way.
Yeah. All right. I want to shift gears into, so Sam, you and I have had plenty of chats around access control, which obviously, makes you think about data breaches and security breaches and those sorts of things. So, let's maybe talk a little bit about, what's sort of happening there around thinking about access control, especially in the agentic workflow kind of space. Because then, Rich, I want to talk about what do you do when you have a breach and what are the impacts of that. So maybe start with the what's happening and what are the potential risks.
Yeah. So if we just talk, start with agentic workflow. So the idea of having a number of agents which form as individuals with specific personas. Might have a data scientist, and then a software developer, and then a test engineer, and then a quality or reliability engineer, and their ability to set up an agentic or a cross-functional team, and then have pass off activities to one another and be able to then be recursive and run back. And so it's great. You have this set of AI capabilities that can work autonomously. And then the question is, well, who kicked off the process, and under what privilege is that process running? And so I think a key question is, when you're designing these, is you say, right, you need to then have structure around the data. So you have access and privilege around the data. And then you need to say, right, what kicks off the process? And there needs to be a privilege around that process. Is it an individual who engages with the process, which means therefore it should inherit my permissions, and that is how it acts through the organization. I don't get access to that data. Why? Because I'm a graduate who's just got employed and I'm not allowed to see that data. Or it's a business process, in which case you then need to be able to create a persona for that business process that therefore has specific privilege as well. So that then when you build this agentic team, it acts with the right privilege on controlled data sets. And so that's sort of what you need to set in place. Otherwise you'll end up with data sets that will answer questions that they may not have. They will answer questions with data that they were should never have had access to, and therefore provide information to users that should never have been able to get an answer to that question. And so that's that's the challenge that you're faced. It's not insurmountable. It's just a structured, layered approach.
Yeah, and we've always locked stuff down by, I guess the type of user, so and DBAs can do certain functions and business analysts can do other functions, and certain people can look at, HR people can look at HR data, for instance, and it seems now that you're going to have these agent teams that have access to a lot of data. Potentially, they need to carry through that authentication and profile of the person actually at the end kicking off the request. But it does feel like there is definitely if you don't focus on that, you have the potential for creating a scenario where you've got some sort of access point. And so, Rich, we've had lots of data breaches over the last few years of alarming size, and they're the ones that get all the headlines. But I'm sure there's thousands that are not quite of that same size that just go by. I mean, lots of people talk about brand risk and those sorts of things. What's the situation for organisations when when they have one of these sorts of events?
Well, I mean, we operate under the notifiable data breach scheme, which is why we see so many of these breaches. And of course, the media is getting far more educated about what they mean and the implications. So, which ultimately I think is a good thing. I mean, as much as it's heartbreaking to see all these breaches, it provides a very visceral reminder for organizations to take these things very seriously. And certainly the new penalties that are being proposed as part of the recent bill to amend the Privacy Act certainly give the OAIC a much bigger stick to wield when it comes to that. And we're already seeing quite a lot of attention being placed on reassessing what risks people are willing to take. So when it comes to the data breach in general, what you're trying to do is, first of all, try and understand how did that breach occur? What information has been breached? And what are the implications, both to the organization and again to the individual, for that information being released? And, you can have a breach where someone accesses the information and then issues a ransom demand. Now, whether or not you choose to pay that ransom is still a matter of debate. I think the government have their point of view. I think major or share-driven organizations may have a slightly different point of view. But nonetheless, you have a process that is relatively straightforward and well mapped out. In the world of artificial intelligence, though, I think one of the benefits of artificial intelligence is, again, you're removing the human error. The vast majority of data breaches that occur do so because of human error. People either not following policies or procedures, or maybe there weren't procedures in place. People left to their own devices about how to do things. So AI does what you tell it to do. It doesn't all of a sudden decide, I'm going to go and poach some data from that system there that I didn't have access to, or I'm going to, have a whole new idea about how business is going to be done. It's very well controlled. We don't live in the world of generalized AI. AIs are very smart, but they're very smart about a very narrow set of things you're asking it to do, albeit you might then chain them together. So for me, I think that becomes one of the benefits of looking at artificial intelligence and where we can deploy artificial intelligence for business process optimization, for decision making, for even the handling of information. Because the less we can put personal information into the hands of an individual, more so that risk profile probably declines. So for me, I think, that's where, in a world where information can get hacked, breached, and so forth, that the use of AI and limiting which systems and who has access to those systems that actually contain meaningful PI is probably a good thing at the end of the day.
I think
Because,
you
yeah,
privacy
again,
by design.
Yes,
the privacy by
and
design
again,
side?
most algorithms, most learning models don't necessarily need the PII, the personal identity information. What they're interested in is the patterns of behavior. And in fact, in many cases, removing some of those elements in itself might help to take some of the ethical bias out. Like when we see CVs, we know that when you remove someone's age, gender, and name, you get a lot fairer decisions off the back of that. And so, if you remove some of those data points that sometimes inherently drive a bias or what have you, you may end up getting a better result anyway. There's a few of people in the industry, and I have an ongoing discussion, particularly in the data warehousing space, of give me a reason when you need PII in a data warehouse. And we've yet to find really a compelling reason to do so, because everything can be done at an aggregate behavioral level. And then you can take those outputs and say, oh, how do I then apply that back to an individual after I have used that model to make a decision or what have you?
And I think that's the thing. You want, as a consumer, you want the company to not store your data for any purposes that you haven't given permission for, but you also want them to treat you like you're a regular or a local. You want to walk in the bar and they'll go Norm, like an old Cheers reference. So, like I think there is that expectation to be treated like an individual, and to do that, companies need to do certain things. So they need to strike that balance, and I think that's a real kind of key message is if you're doing privacy by design, as Sam was explaining, there's already some really good approaches to manage, the way you structure the initial project, doing program to understand your privacy implications and what data you're dealing with, and then do privacy by design from the start, and manage your access control and all those sorts of things. So, look, I've got questions here on the ethical side, on managing things like children's data, on GDPR, a whole bunch of things. We're already a half an hour in, so we're not going to draw this out to be an hour and a half masterclass. So maybe just some final thoughts, Sam, maybe to start with. And I think probably from just a practical perspective, if most people are starting their first AI initiative or in their first set of AI initiatives, what's the advice? Do you target something that goes nowhere near privacy? Like what are you seeing? How are people kind of tackling this?
So, look, I think that the first application of AI should be the highest value application of AI in your business. And so, part of the work that I do is actually use AI to ingest information about your business, your strategy, your market, the way that you work, etc. Try and work out. It's just it's a multi-tool, and there's lots of them. But what is the highest value application? And value is a function of the erosion that you'll get from risk and non-compliance as well. And so you will, unless you have a really high value part of your workflow that deals with PI, but it's consuming an enormous amount of cost in your business, it's unlikely to be the first cab off the rank. But if it is, the stack of value will be so high that it'll warrant the time and effort to invest in making sure that all those safeguards are in place. And so I think it should be treated in that way. You don't look to apply AI in your business. You look to address opportunities and risks and the challenges in your business and use AI as an enabler to get there. I think that there is reason to be wary about it because how it's implemented, it can, if you want to give it autonomy within your business in a workflow, then it's only going to behave as well as we define the parameters in which it will behave within. And we've proven that humans are the issue in this loop. The AIs will do exactly as we ask it to do and say, I didn't want it to do that, but that's what I asked it to do. And so I think that we just need to, you want to go for not too complex, high value to begin with, and then build your competencies over time.
Yeah, perfect. Rich, any final thoughts as a starting point from the...
I'll kind of tack on a little bit to what Sam said, in that there's an adage that says every system is perfectly designed to achieve the outcomes it's delivering. And if you're getting bad outcomes, then it's the system that's been designed incorrectly. And so, particularly in the world of data, and when you've got so many people involved in how information flows, how it's used, one of the biggest things I think people can do is to start looking at issues at a systemic level. Take out the individual blame, because if people are worried that, oh God, I've made a mistake in my code and it's now caused this big disaster, oh dear, I'm going to lose my job, then they're less likely to come forward. Whereas if they're in an environment where they feel encouraged to say, I stuffed up here, guys, then we can have a systemic review to say, how do we prevent that from happening in the future? Is there another audit step or another review step that we can use? Because that's one of the things that makes most teams the most successful, is that idea of trust, that I know I'm in a safe environment. I can share, okay, I've made a mistake. How do we fix that at a systemic level? And I think that holds true here as well, is that people wanting to use artificial intelligence, there's so many reasons to do so. But we've got to get to a point where we realize if we're getting a bad outcome, even when it comes down to that data breach, you go back to, well, what was wrong with our system that resulted in that being possible to begin with? And that would be my big my big recommendation, is to don't point the finger, don't hold any individual responsible. Ultimately, the organization is accountable. It is the systems, processes, policies, procedures that are in place that ultimately are going to deliver that breach if it happened. So that's the level I would elevate the conversation to.
Isn't it amazing that even as everything moves on, systems thinking and diligent, detailed design is still the important things to make sure that these things are successful. So
the last bit around that is the regulators need to be adopting this as fast as they can, so they can try and keep pace with the innovation that's in the market. And that's the real dilemma that we're in, is that regulation has been slow and a laggard, and it can't afford to be in this circumstance. It actually needs to keep pace with the industry, which means it needs to be deploying AI at the speed of industry. And I think
and there's such a challenge with that. Like if you get into the whole deep fakes sphere and all of those sorts of things, where there's zero regulation yet, like obviously there's a lot to be done from that side to catch up with where innovation's at. But that sounds like another 2 or 3 masterclasses.
Yeah. Last week, California updated the definition of personal information in their regulations to cover neural data, because there's now devices that will read brainwave activities through non-invasive means. So that technology is already with us, and we've got no regulation covering it right now. So we've got more challenges to come for sure.
Absolutely. All right, we're going to leave it there.
Whole other masterclass indeed.
Yeah. All right, guys. Thank you very much for that. I think it's great having both of you who clearly specialize in aligned areas, but very different areas. And there's a real coming together of these two aspects at the moment. I think it's a really interesting conversation. And obviously, if anyone who is actually listening to this wants to get in touch with either of you, then you can definitely do that through the community, through Ignition. We've obviously partnered with both these guys and keen to help and make the connections. Or obviously you both can be very easily found on LinkedIn and other things as well. So thanks for joining today. I really appreciate it, and we'll chat again very, very soon, I guess.
Thanks.
Cheers. Thanks, Julien.